Hi, my name is Hannah Jane Pritchett, current U of A GIST Master's student. Welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast. Our hosts are Jennifer Mason and Chris Lukenbiel, and today we will be talking with Teresa Gregory, who is the project director at Statistical Research Incorporated. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the University of Arizona GIST podcast series. I am an assistant professor of practice in the GIST program, and my name is Jennifer Mason, and I'm also joined by Dr. Chris Lukenbiel, who is the director of the GIST program, and we are fortunate to have Teresa Gregory here for this podcast, who is the project director at Statistical Research Incorporated. Thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So my records indicate that you graduated from our program in 2016, I believe.
That is correct.
GIST. So I guess my first question, first about background, was how you discovered GIS. I'm curious, for me, I had no idea what GIS was when I first got into the field. So how did you find it and get into the program?
So that's a really long roundabout story. So let's see if I can wrap this up in 5 minutes or less for you. I had actually started with a degree in archaeology back in 96 and went actually to work for statistical research in 96 through 2000. But then that led me down another path tracking molecular archaeology, another way to data cite. And so I got into molecular and cellular biology, which I did, and is working at the University of Arizona Neuroscience Department for 8 years, when one of my graduate student colleagues who ran the GIS manager as site program and archaeological records office at the Arizona State Museum there asked me to come back to my first degree and take over for him when he retired. So it was either find another lab because my PI was not taking any new graduate students and I knew I had to find a new position in neuroscience, or go back to my first degree. And I told him that I knew nothing about GIS at all. I didn't even know what it stood for. So he basically said, not a problem. You know a lot about computers and IT, and you'll be just fine. Here's a book, Getting to Know GIS 10.0 to 10.3. Goes, read it. Okie dokie. So I read it and started with him in January of 2015 to do the overlap before he retired later that year, to be the administrator of the Archaeological Records Office, as well as the GIS manager of ASSITE, which is the GIS platform for all the cultural resources in Arizona. And so when he left, I decided that even though I knew everything I needed to know about GIS to be a GIS manager, because he had showed me or I'd learned it, I wanted to know more. And I had, for 4 months before, gone to AGIC for that position, and actually started helping on the AGIC conference committee because I was voluntold by Shay Lamar to help out, and met John Dadlow, who had a booth about the GIST program at the U of A, and I thought, hey, that would be great. I'll still work full-time as a GIS manager. At the end of the day at 5:30, I'll walk right over to ENR2 and on my own time and my own dime, get a master's in GIS so I can know more about it, which I did, and I am very grateful that I did. So that's how I got into GIS. Kind of the back door, but it worked. It worked. So
it's interesting for me, Teresa, that having you come into the program around 2016, for me, I had started with professional masters in GIS in 2003 at another university. And in Arizona, the cultural resource management industry with GIS was really big, it seemed, in the early 2000s. And then I saw like a slower decline in GIS students throughout the years. But we still have a number of them that have come through the program, but just maybe not as much. So in terms of just in GIS with the cultural resource management industry, like what kinds of work do you do that are kind of unique in terms of that archaeology meets GIS?
Yeah, so when, like I said, I had originally got that first archaeology degree back in '96, and there was not GIS. We used total stations. There weren't tremble units. We used compasses and maps and drew out everything. Occasionally, maybe using some type of programs like CAD or something, but for the most part, it was old school, kind of like learning how to travel along with a compass and a map in the glove compartment by my grandpa, who had the compass mounted on his dashboard on his green wood-sided station wagon, which was really cool. So I had that interest at an early age, and having that degree in archaeology and knowing that the cultural resource management firms or contract archaeologists were going the route of GIS to produce better looking maps and a easier way to map archaeological sites and projects and historic buildings and structures and stuff. It just sort of was a natural progression. So ASSITE is sort of the hub for all the cultural resource management sites, projects, historic structures, districts, and stuff for the state of Arizona, where everyone is putting their information. So it was a very natural progression for me to then leave the U of A and the Archaeological Records Office and go back to 3.5 years ago, go back to that contract archaeology firm to do GIS as a GIS analyst to help them with reports and mapping and their GIS team or CAX team. So they do the cartography, GIS, they usually have some kind of combination thereof. And like I said, all of their reports that they do, all of their maps, everything they do for clients, it's GIS is integral in all CRM firms, as well as agencies like ADOT or BLM or federal things. And personally right now, I'm working on a contract for the National Guard. So it's really important, and every CRM has a GIS team on staff to help with the mapping. So my understanding with cultural resource management in Arizona, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I would explain it to other students, would be that similar to like environmental impact reports, you have to do a cultural resource report if you're going into sensitive areas. We've actually had a number of students that have an alumni out of the GIST program that have gone into this industry. So mapping sites, understanding where data has been collected that is culturally sensitive or of importance to the state and its history. But is it a federally mandated law, or are there state mandated laws on recording? And so it's kind of like I guess you'd say an asset. It's not necessarily asset management, but like the locational attribution is very important to the resources. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Yeah, that is correct, Chris. So that is twofold, and you are correct. Let me start at the top. So it is federally mandated. So there's a federal law. It falls under 36 CRF 79 that protects historic properties, and archaeological sites fall under that. So the federal government, in what we call Section 106, mandates that any property is subject to review by a cultural resource management company or a professional archaeologist before any construction can happen or before any improvement can happen. there's a close connection between that and the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, who helps mandate that to make sure that the laws are followed and things are going around about as they should. So it is possible that, a property was just evaluated 5 years ago and SHPO signed off on them, then that property can be cleared. But it is a federal mandate. Now down to the state level, the state does in Arizona, because as you know, we have a lot of cultural resources because of our dry, arid climate. We have 22 recognized federal tribes. The next person over New Mexico has a lot as well. But obviously here in the Southwest, it's a lot more than, say, back in Midwest or Eastern states. And we have the Arizona Antiquities Act, which also backs that federal 106, saying, hey, yeah, you need to have an archaeologist clear this property before you do any work. And then if there's any eligible sites that they determine eligible, because they're very important for us to keep or preserve, or any historic or prehistoric stuff, that will be mandated by the State Historic Preservation Office, SHPO, and concurred upon. And so that's the stuff that's tracked. And we have a lot of it in Arizona. So not everything, but there are a lot of sites that have to be documented. So I can tell you, as the past as-site GIS manager, there were over 60,000 archaeological sites in that database, most of them in Arizona, a few on the borders, like, California, New Mexico. And there were over 120,000 projects, so surveys that have happened to find those projects and find those sites. So it's very, very important, and it is a federal law. And the Arizona State Museum Records Office is the mandated records repository for the under the Arizona Antiquities Act. And as-site was a governor's executive order in 2006. I think it's 2006C, if memory serves, to mandate as-site to hold all those cultural resources. So in the past, before that went online, and around 2000, 2005 is when it started the up-ramp to get stuff, people would have to actually come to the Arizona State Museum Records Office to look at all the sites in Arizona. Does that answer your question? So yes, there are federal and state laws, bottom line.
I guess kind of along those lines, not really. I'm wondering what kinds of, or maybe some of your most memorable projects that you've worked on over the years or recently that you could talk about, maybe some of the GIS skills that you had to utilize to do those projects.
Okay, so obviously starting out as the as-site GIS manager, that gave me a chance to integrate what was desktop. They used 10.2, Esri 10.2, and learn all of that aspect, as well as getting up to 10.4 in the Master's GIST program, and learning the different tools to help create polygons for sites, or help buffer sites for intersection, all the stuff that we needed for archaeology. And that sort of set the baseline for the job that I currently have, and I'm 100% on a contract for the Arizona Army National Guard. And obviously ArcGIS Pro is the way of the future. So we have taken classes to better ourselves at Pro and get used to that. And we are creating a new geodatabase for all the cultural resources. And all of the training, we work really closely. We have a contract with Esri and a contract with Microsoft. So I work really closely with both of those companies. And all of the training that's happening, and some is free. A lot of the training they have, you can go online and get a YouTube. You don't have to have credits to get that training. And those have actually helped progress both my knowledge of GIS in general, but also help keeping that cutting edge of what's happening right now in the world and where we're headed for the future, to get everything in GDBs and create a GIS viewer for the National Guard, so that they can stay in compliance with those federal laws that I talked about, because they're mostly federal, so they can have all that at their fingertips. So,
are there, you mentioned obviously doing training in Arc Pro, and kind of there's always new releases anyway that we have to learn the new updates, and transitioning data into geodatabases. Are there other skills that you feel like after the program that you had to kind of learn on your own in order to do your day-to-day tasks and projects?
Yeah, so the program was, that 1 year intense 30 credit hour masters that showed a little bit about Python, a little bit about other types of coding, a little bit about how to move around in ArcGIS. There was a section by Gary Christopherson on archaeology as well. So I got that base, but I already had that base too. So I learned some new tips there. But when I left, I went back to 10.2 desktop. And now I have had to accelerate that so I can be on Pro 2.4 and learn the difference between the as-site shape files and how we can get that into a geodatabase and the nuances. So there's been a lot of learning of the GIS sort of on my own, but also work has been very influential and beneficial to helping that knowledge grow with the CACS department at Statistical Research on this National Guard grant. So, yeah. And I'm always learning new stuff every day.
So along the idea of learning new stuff every day, you've been very successful in that transition into a GIS career, even though you drew upon a lot of your skills and your expertise from your past, which what we always recommend that students and alumni do. But what do you see as some of the biggest factors that helped you succeed in your GIS career?
I think there was a couple of factors that really helped excel me quickly through this career in GIS. One of them would be, if I'm going to admit this, my attention to detail and being a perfectionist and organizational skills. So when I went through college, I did that as an administrative assistant. So I'm really good at organizing in files and keeping things in order. I think that was key to being able to process all the stuff about ArcGIS and keep that knowledge, that learned knowledge, that sort of, listening and reading and learning. I think those are really key. And the other thing is, I have always had an interest in computers ever since, dare I say, BASIC and Fortran computer language and punch cards that I learned in high school. So that sort of interest in IT and computer and programs and software, I think aided so that ArcGIS was just another software to learn. And so I was able to do that, obviously, from a manual, and then take the amazing class at the U of A under your tutelage, Chris, and be able to succeed very well. So I think it was just that attention to detail and the IT computer interest and, kind of consultant that I used to do that helped. And then going into archaeology, obviously, that's because I had a degree in archaeology, so that helped there, so yeah, that's it. Cool.
For especially like the students who might be watching this and wanting to start a career in GIS, or even people who don't know what GIS is, want to hear more, especially for them, what kind of tips would you have for them, I guess, getting into the program, getting through the program, and kind of setting themselves up for a career, maybe specifically in your field, but also just GIS in general? What do you think would be your tips to give them starting out?
Sure. So I would definitely say, even though I wouldn't say this for other things, Google it. Go online, check out Esri, check out those free tutorials on GIS, just kind of get a feel for, this digital mapping thing that's happening, because every industry, if you go to a GIS fair, you'll see that even sprouts or real estate agents are using GIS to plan and to know where to build things. It's not just for cities to know that, the sewer line runs under this road, or there's a cultural resource over here. It's used in a lot of fields, and it's going to continue to be used in a lot of fields. So that's one thing. If you can go to any kind of GIS event, even if it's a meetup, just to talk with other people, I think that's a great opportunity. And then I would say, just do it. Just do it. I mean, just do it. It's a great field to have. And for me, even though I have other options in my life and could go other way, and I really miss bench, basic neuroscience, molecular biology research, I love GIS. And that really hits home now as and kind of managing the data management of everything. So working with Esri on our workflow stuff, workflow manager, which they have, the geodatabase, the GIS viewer, the digital curation, sort of archiving all the resources, Azure Government Cloud, which we've moved to, all these things. I'm really, really happy. And I found that out 2 days ago when I got to play GIS analyst for a day. Working with other GIS analysts, just looking at pro and just maps and looking at all that stuff, I'm like, oh, this is so exciting. Can't I do this every day? So, which I could, don't get me wrong, I could, but I enjoy the other stuff too. So I would say, yeah, just read about it, look at it online, get to some kind of meetup or something, and take a class or two online now, obviously. And I am sure you will enjoy it if you like computers at all. So, yeah.
Teresa, you've been very active in the GIS professional community in the state of Arizona, as well as locally in the Tucson Pima community at a number of events. As you mentioned, you work on the conference committee for the Arizona Geographic Information Council. And as a representative of our community, like for students and newly minted alumni of GIST programs, it's like, what sort of benefits do you see out of networking in professional community?
Good question, Chris. I find that being active in the GIS community, so like you said, in the Arizona Geographic Information Council, AGIC, which is kind of the biggest GIS conference that takes place usually in August or September in Prescott, but we'll be virtually in October, so check that out. As well as the meetup groups with the city and county GIS people, as well as staying connected with GIST alumni. I think it gives you that sense of community, that sense of family, and also not only people that you can say, hey, I was doing this the other day on GIS and this was happening, do you have an idea? And that's kind of what you would do in science or in anything really, to kind of bounce off ideas off each other. But it also allows you to know what's going on the world and in the GIS world and beyond, in case you have to move to a different state, or want to follow a different trajectory along your career path. I think it's a great way to be in touch and network. I think it's essential for anyone to do that, even if you're a doctor and a nurse, or whatever field you're in. I think networking is key. I think communication is key, and staying in touch with people. I have found it as a very rewarding. So
I'm curious, as you've you've had a lot of experience kind of networking around here over the past several years, when you went into GIS, what your experience has been as a woman, if you've seen the field kind of change. Traditionally we say in fields, maybe there's some underrepresentation of women, and that was kind of my experience when I first started my PhD. I'd go to these academic conferences in GIS, and I was definitely a minority, at least in academia. And part of this question also is, we were really excited to do March Madness, which ended up getting canceled, and it kind of naturally started to work out that we just had all of these amazing women in GIS throughout Arizona who were going to come and present. So, I'd love to know what your experience has been, and you were in a STEM field anyway before you went into GIS, and how that's evolved as you've kind of integrated within the community and seen all of that.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and times have absolutely changed. So 20 years ago, even in science, there weren't a lot of women in molecular biology, but that has changed over the years. And when I took the GIST class in 2016, it was actually about 50-50. So that was really great to see. We have just started Women in GIS here in Arizona in the last 6 months. It's headed up by Jenna up in Phoenix. So we meet once a month, once every quarter, something like that. So that's really great. And that's another way to network and relate to other females or girls, ladies in the field to say, hey, how do you think about this? Because I realize overall the difference, is the gap is closing between men and women, but it's still there. And I think that at least almost all the GIS women that I have met are very strong personalities. So I think that is an important trait. And I think that's important for every woman to feel self-confidence and know that you are appreciated and know that you are important and that you make a difference in whatever field that you're in. So I think that over the past 10 years, there have been more women in GIS. We're still moving up there. You go to Esri and you can see the difference. But it's slowly but surely it's coming. So there is Women in GIS in Arizona. Check that out on the website as well. I'm part of that. So just a person, I'm just a participant, but absolutely reach out if you're interested in that.
So for students coming out and hitting the job market, I know with the pandemic, it's kind of hard to say do this, do that, because it changes it a little bit. But in general, students kind of hitting the market today in GIS, what sort of advice would you have for them of, seeing how to get a job, how to get your career started from your personal experience?
So one of the key factors I think of that is to have a really good not CV, you guys don't call it curriculum, a really good resume. Sorry, that's a science thing. A really good resume that reflects exactly the skills that it's short, sweet, and to the point, so that when that comes across the desk of the person that's going to interview or hire you, you'll stand out, because that's your first line. You don't get to talk to them anymore. It's right there on paper, so it's got to look good. And then I think just be open and honest and really try to make a connection with someone, especially now with the world the way it is, just like this. You know, we can't all meet in person for March Madness. Yay, Chris, and me and you making that title. I love it because I love basketball. But you need to be able to come across as someone that's intelligent, smart, friendly, and approachable. So I have an instance here. We just hired somebody during COVID to help out. And of the applicants, the one that stood out was the person that made a connection with us. And I don't care how that is. I don't care if you're like, hey, I went to UCSB as well, or, oh, yay, I like Rocky Road ice cream as well, or whatever it is that you hear in the conversation, in the interview. Make that connection and you will make that impression. And then do your best. And it's really important right now to stress the fact that you are a team player, but you work well independently, because now we're all stuck at home for the most part, working off computers ourselves with not a GIS team, in the room or down the hall that you can talk to. We do have Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever, platform you use. But it's really important to be able to show that you can work well independently, you can get the job done for them, and you do a great job. So, yeah. So that would be my advice.
The person you hired, I believe, was Jim Wilcox, the 2019 MSGIST student, correct?
That is correct. So what year? Yeah, he just did his master's last year in May, right?
Yeah, and I think he's a great example because of the enthusiasm he showed for GIS and for archaeology in general to build a connection. Yeah. Yes.
And for us, and that's a good point. And he's great. He is a wonderful coworker. He was coming 21 years off the Air Force. So putting him on the National Guard contract, there's that soldier to soldier thing. So he made that connection, as well as having a recent degree in archaeology, which benefits you because you understand what a site is and what Section 106 is and what NEPA requirements are, that type of thing. But the skills, and I know he didn't have anything prior to that, the skills he learned in your class, because during that year, was it 2019? Because you guys went to the 3 semester, right? He went from desktop to pro, which actually, when he came to us, we were still using desktop and we were just getting ready to use pro. So we relied on him heavily, like, ooh, what do you think? How do you do that? And he just showed us just 2 days ago, highlight that attribute field, now hit Control F, and now you can do this find thing. And we're like, what? So yeah, it's he's working out great. So you guys are producing great GIST students that are going far and doing well. So, yeah.
So one thing, I guess I'm late to bringing it up now, but at the beginning you actually mentioned, you had a compass and a paper map going around finding your way. And it's funny that you mentioned that because my dad used to call it a treasure hunt, and we had a Thomas Guide map book in our car before, MapQuest and all of that. And he would tell me, I was really young, figure out where we are on the overview map, find the page, and then get us home because there was so much traffic. I grew up in LA, so he's like, figure out how to get home. And so I would, have to mentally rotate in my head how, which way we're facing and get us home, and kind of use my internal compass. And, I kind of feel like it was my destiny to go into geography and GIS. And, I wouldn't change that, but a segue into a question, or a last question from me is there anything you would change going back? You don't have to go that far back, but anything, on your career path that led you to where you are now, is there anything you would have done differently?
I don't think so. I really don't. I don't think there's anything that I would do differently. And yes, those early memories of Grandpa with the compass on the dash, and we had Rand McNally, not Thomas Guide, but see, and here's where I would be. I'd like, hey, LA, I lived on El Segundo. I worked at UCLA. See, I make that connection. So it was great. And then I think that combination of sort of the interest in archaeology for me, maps, X never marks the spot, as we know from Indiana Jones, and sort of that, like National Treasure, that treasure hunt map sort of thing, sparked that interest, even though I went down a completely different path at that time. I wouldn't change that. I mean, doing archaeology for a little while and working at UCLA in pathology, doing the molecular biology stuff, I learned a lot, and I loved it. And I met a lot of people who I still keep in touch with. I think that I still would not change a thing at all. Particularly going back to get a master's in GIS, I think that's one of the smartest things I ever did. Because it opened more doors for me. So yeah, if I could start over again, I would probably do all of that education and all of my career path exactly the same. I think I am where I'm supposed to be right now, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Teresa. It was nice to check in with you and hear about the wonderful things that Statistical Research is up to and learn a little bit more about the cultural resource industry and how they're using GIS. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Women in GIS, AGIC, Pima County event, as well as next year's March Madness.
Yes!
As one of the founding members of the name. So look forward to seeing you around in the community.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you, Jenny and Chris and Hannah Jane. I really appreciate being invited to speak on this podcast as a GIST alumni and working in the GIS community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.